Many years ago, I was a learning mentor in an educational setting, in an alternative education setting. So I was a pupil referral unit. And to be honest, there was definitely times where students walked through the doors and they had better maths than me, to be honest, even though I was staff. But what became very clear is that their ability to navigate relationships with their peers and professionals in their life is where they struggled. And when I think about my academic journey, I was one of those students who I wasn't the sharpest tool in the box, but I had a natural knack for building and establishing relationships with my friends and with staff around me. And we rounded up a program in a school in Reading. And one of the year 11 students basically said something to the liking of, it's helped me to not see my learning as this mundane task that I have to do, but something that shapes my future. And for us, I think that's a big part of what we want to offer students.